Hi, I'm Eileen Kavanaugh. Welcome to Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers. We hope you enjoy this discussion of Minnesota literature.
My name is Ellie Sturgis, and I'm chairperson of the Literature for Land Ethic Committee, which is part of Milkweed Editions. I am going to introduce Ellen Liberatori, who is Executive Director of Save the Earth Foundation, and Emilie Buchwald will speak after Ellen, and Emilie is editor of Milkweed Editions.
I want to especially welcome everyone tonight to the Petit Atelier here at the Aveda Institute. This used to be a Masonic temple, and the architecture and aesthetics of this place, I think, blend really well with its current purpose, which is an education center for Aveda Corporation. Aveda created Give to the Earth Foundation in 1991, and I've been with the foundation for about 3 years, testing out its mission and purpose, which is to support environmental and social causes through grassroots community action. We are all here, activists, writers, artists, and as Terry says, we are all here because of love. Love for nature, for wilderness, for one another. Not easy concepts, not easy feelings. We all think we are loving, evolved people, but so much of what we do disconnects us from the intimacy of being together in space to allow and tolerate each other as a species. It's about living without lines, without definition. It's about being here now. Artists, activists, writers, responding to and being vigilant for boundary waters. It's about protecting those sacred places. Sometimes it's painful. Like another writer says, empathy is exposed with one's pain. It's human. To separate art and creativity from wilderness, from activism, from art is not natural. So again, I want to just thank all of you so very, very much in celebrating the writers and the winners of the essay contest. Now I'll have Emilie come up.
It's very heartening to be with you who are here tonight, participating and sharing our mutual devotion to the boundary waters and taking pleasure in celebrating the essays that have been written in their name. The co-sponsors of this contest, Caribou Coffee, Midwest Mountaineering, Minnesota Parks and Wilderness Coalition, and the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, all wanted Minnesotans to have the opportunity to give their testimonies about this precious, irreplaceable wilderness area, the largest wilderness area east of the Rockies.
You've heard references tonight to Testimony, which is really a wonderful book. And I will, as persuasive as I found all these essays, I want to tell you that this piece by Barry Lopez is another, that if I had gotten my hands on this first, it would have appeared in my publication instead of this one. We're not debating wilderness here in trying to decide the fate of Utah's undeveloped public lands. The term is too restrictive. We're debating the future direction of Western civilization, and our issue could not be more serious. A brutal, pointed lesson of human history is that unhealthy civilizations die. Civilizations that are physically, spiritually, or economically corrosive fall apart. Their people wither. If we do not want to pass away as a civilization, let alone as a Western nation, we need to recast our discussions so that it is this, not wilderness, that is at stake. We need to see what a grave decision the release of public land for development is. If our central concerns remain who wins in these disagreements, or what sorts of concessions will please the most people, 20 years from now, we'll be looked upon as fools. In a moment that called for discerning intelligence, we'll be seen as people who settled for a fight over control, a venal and pedestrian aspiration. The wisest thing now, it seems to me, is to regard undeveloped lands as an asset and to protect every acre of land possible. American culture, more than any other in the world, has been shaped by the image of private exploration of public land. The opportunity to still have that experience is deeply important to our sense of hope. And what you might call the principle, what's left in the account, is down to a pittance. If we do not take the time now to understand where the diminishment of wilderness in America is taking us, the day will soon arrive when it will not matter. We will have given up a vision of heaven to bet we're not embarked on a trip to hell. The United States is a nation of staggering wealth. We can easily afford to conserve what we've been given and to wait patiently for a wisdom that so far has eluded us, a wisdom that will enable us to convey this gift, not simply to consume it. Thank you.
Driving to Camp du Nord off the Echo Trail on Burnside Lake, I breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that I will restock my store of life-sustaining wilderness sounds, smells, and images, which has been drawn down to a dangerously low level. It's the day after Labor Day. I'm with my 84-year-old father, who took his children camping in the Boundary Waters and to Camp du Nord long before it was a YMCA camp, when it was operated by Jean, Marion, and Nida, three enterprising women who taught school on the Iron Range and whose summertime passion was building and running the camp from 1935 to 1960. Leaving the Twin Cities, we drive through fog from Hinckley to Cloquet. Oddly, the fog is comforting. It's the fog of the highway and the fog of a fading memory. It smooths the edges of my father's repeated question, where is it that we're going? We're going back to early memories of loons, blueberries, mosquitoes buzzing through the night, of chilly mornings lying in bed until Dad lit the twigs and birch bark and the fire snapped into life. The aroma of burning pine filled the air, and it was time to crawl out and greet the day. First activity was a look through the kitchen window of Salt Lick Cabin at the block of salt where the car park is today. And yes, there were not one, not two, but 3 deer. We're coming back because my father's first love is birds and nature. And as he slips into the quieter world of Alzheimer's doubts and disorientation, I feel myself on the precipice of age beside him. We both need steadying. I want to see him at home in the wilderness, to let nature pull him back and to regain a healthier perspective myself. We hike the Portage Trail to Slim Lake, and he climbs the rocky heights to pick the season's last blueberries. We sit together in the warm sun, perched high above the lake, beyond the pressure of obligations and temporal details. And a smile of recognition and contentment returns to his face. We come back to camp alone, where friendly voices welcomed him in earlier years, Doc, the ornithologist and naturalist. Father and son, we come back to enjoy each other in the company of timeless granite boulders, lichens, trees, and minnows that dart about in the clear shoreline water.
I don't believe my dog, Mac, through his entire overfed, under-challenged marshmallow of a life, ever stopped to consider why he chased squirrels. In a slow biologic process, instantaneous by geologic time, animal husbandry has refined food chain champion into lap potato porker. But somewhere deep within the DNA, a hunter gene resists, fighting to part the gauzy veiled boundary that separates Lobo from the ilk of Mac. Through our societal transitions from nomadic to information age, humans betray a desire also to domesticate themselves, sacrificing along the way the cultural rituals that sharpen boundaries and celebrate change. One night years ago, during an unusually rainy Boy Scout canoe trip, a dormant rite resurrected itself over Northern Light Lake as we awoke to a barrage of thunder and lightning and a gathering of water in our floorless tents. I was a young adolescent forced to make an adult decision: curl up and hide or face my problem. I decided to save the few semi-dry things I still owned, and while squatting in my undershorts, balanced my quickly stuffed Duluth pack on my head as water flowed across my feet. It would be a long night, raining until dawn. When first light arrived, I was cold, cramped, exhausted, but quietly elated. I had survived. Sharing such experiences forges a group into a community, and subsequent problems seem less difficult. Somewhere in my DNA, a hunter gene resists, driving me into the wilderness to chase my squirrels. The Boundary Waters is the site of my genetic protest. Here, life is distilled to nomadic values. We bring only what we need and carry all that we bring. It is the hardest work I do, and it feels good to test my clay. We have no objective other than our circular journey, and as our small band struggles together, we grow, individually and collectively, and return to our original location in a different place. I'm quickened by the northern slate sky, so low you can almost touch it with your paddle. As we slip through that narrow envelope between heaven and earth, memory stirs to the daily rituals of self-sufficiency, to the rhythms of paddle and sun. The demons of my DNA are quieted, and biologic time and geologic time merge, joining the present to the primeval, the solitary to the social, the finite to the infinite. A boundary is a place of transition. Water is an element of life. And to an old squirrel chaser, the Boundary Waters is both.
I like BWCA a lot. It makes you feel strong after going on the portages or paddling for about 5 or 6 miles. It makes me feel like I can do anything I want to. The first time I went to Boundary Waters, when I was 8, with my dad and aunt, we had an interesting time on the portages, short or long hikes that you carry your gear across. On the first portage, my aunt fell over when she was putting on her backpack. She looked like a big green turtle. The next hike we went on was funny also. We met a group of high school guys who were carrying backpacks weighing about 3 pounds each. Their leader said, "Look at that girl and her big pack. You guys sure are lazy." My pack was 22 pounds. This summer, my dad and I went to BWCA. We tried a route going to Basswood Lake. The portages were so muddy that my shoes turned from white to black. One lake was full of lily pads and sand. We got stuck twice. When we got to a campsite, it was lunchtime. We set up our tent and then ate. Our campsite was very big. It was beautiful too. The water was so calm that the only motion was a ripple in the lake behind our canoe. We saw many ducks, loons, and other birds. We saw 2 eagles also. We only saw boats a few times. One night, 2 fishing boats thought that they would try fishing by our campsite. They came at 8:30 p.m. and left at 10 o'clock p.m. When we went to bed at 9:30 p.m., we could still hear them talking. That was really annoying. I love going to Boundary Waters. My grandpa once said that if the boaters want to see the wilderness, they should go to Voyageurs National Park. And if that's not good enough, they should go canoe at BWCA. I think that if the canoe areas are left for canoers and the boat areas are left as they are, and if Voyageurs was made more known, everyone would be happy.
For the first 5 minutes of my first teaching job, I received instruction on what to do in case of a race riot. It was June 1966 in Harlem, New York. The instructions were to bring the 4-year-old children that were to be my Head Start class into a circle in the center of the room, their backs to the windows, arms behind their heads, protecting. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota now. I moved here when Don Fraser was championing the Northern Wilderness. His victory for the Boundary Waters was my first Minnesotan event. I loved that he fought the good fight and won. I loved life in Minnesota in the early 70s, the race riots behind us, integration and conservation ahead. Last year, I took a road trip in a Chevy van with 5 friends. We went to testify against encroachment on the protections of Voyageurs National Park. We camped on Lake Kabetogama. In the morning, I ran half a mile to swim. In Minneapolis, I rarely run, I never swim. The clean air was a drink from the fountain of youth. I gulped it. At the hearing, I carried a fluorescent sign that said, "No motors in BWCA." I met a man whose signs said, "No people in BWCA." He was joking. "If people can't enjoy a place, what good is it?" he asked me. He had already noted with disdain that I was an outsider, not a local. In Savage, Minnesota, there is a rare wetland, a calcareous fen, so inaccessible that only a handful of people ever visit it. They report that in the early spring, they can see the footprints left the autumn before. There are plans for a business park and a road to remedy this. Yet, I still believe. I believe in the sacred boundary waters even as their fate is reopened for debate. I believe in the end of racism, even as Minneapolis plans to return to neighborhood segregated schools. I believe in the circle of footprints of the secret lovers of the Savage Fen, secluded for the last time, huddled protectively together under first snow. I believe we humans will learn to cherish what is left. I believe we will leave some wilderness up north, where a purple martin can sing a song of hope and not be heard by a single one of us.
The essay is called Catch and Release. A moose the size of a Volkswagen bus lay dead at the tail end of the river. Impaled by a boulder, its spine was crushed and snapped in half by the collision. Its hooves rattled about in the rushing rapids. Scavengers had torn away the taut skin of the chest cavity and feasted on the animal's heart. Standing on the shore in my wading boots, I was dazed and weakened by the sight of the dead beast. Todd came up behind me. "Must have fallen through the ice this winter and ended up down here," he said. We stood there for a while in awe of the moose, fly rods dangling from our limp fingers. Imagined for a few ghostly seconds the moose's death journey. It looked like the overbearing theme of our trip was going to be death. Our good friend Pat had to stay behind because his father was dying of terminal cancer. Of the 4 paddlers, none of us could remember a trip to the Boundary Waters wilderness without him. The evening before, we sat around the campfire with 10 cups of bourbon and told stories about Pat, his father, and the fun we'd had on past trips. We woke to a slight drizzle and dull headaches. The sight of the dead moose did little to lift our spirits. It did plenty to remind us of one basic truth: wilderness is the struggle for life. In the Boundary Waters wilderness, with sore shoulders from days of paddling and blistered feet from long, wet portages, we experienced the struggle and learned to respect the power of nature. We decided to fish. Every trip we'd ever taken the BWCAW was about fishing. Our mouths watered for the taste of fresh walleye or northern pike. The rain started to slacken. Some 50 yards downriver, I saw Todd's 9-foot rod bend with life. He gave the customary yell, "Fish on!" I stripped in my line and watched him expertly land the fish. Northern pike, a nice one. He unhooked the streamer from its mouth, and though the pike would have yielded a nice fillet, he released it back into the black depths. Each of us ended up catching a number of fish that afternoon. Without preconception or spoken agreement, we chose to release every one of them. For us, this journey to the wilderness would be a celebration of life.
I debated this year about whether I could get away for a sojourn to the Boundary Waters with 5 women I did not even know. My friend had invited me along on her Femme du Nord trip. The other women were flying in from around the country, crazy, just like you are, Julie said. And so I went. The aches the first night and the following morning reminded me I was no longer a 15-year-old girl visiting the Boundary Waters for the first time. I remember sobbing my way through my first portage. Our guide, Bill, soon was walking alongside me asking, "What's your name? Have you ever carried a canoe before?" Crying, I answered him, and I grew stronger. At 25, I carried that image of portaging a canoe while in labor with my son, my longest portage. The toughness I found inside was enough at 15, at 25, and I was finding out again at 40. As I paddled through days of perfect weather and silent lakes, I grew stronger. My thoughts sharpened as I calmed down, the stresses of my life fading away. As I paddled, I thought about the women in my family who had been here before me. My grandmother, a young and deeply tanned woman on a trip to the Boundary Waters in 1920, We have pictures of Grandma and Aunt Mittie in their men's knickers, jackets, and high leather boots, outfitted against the elements. My own mother on an early trip for high school girls out of Widgewagon in 1946. I cherish the photo of her in a striped shirt and white cap, sitting on a rock with her best and lifelong friends, Betty and Joan. But the twists and turns of their lives never led them back here. I am suddenly grateful for Julie, the friend who has invited me back. At night around the campfire after a day's paddle, we middle-aged business women, wives, and mothers share Advil, bug spray, and our own stories. We offer each other the hope that we'll still venture into the wilderness in our 60s and 70s and 80s, and I fervently hope so. With the bears at bay and the loons calling across our private lake, the silence rings deep in our ears and in our hearts. That is the magic. Silence and so much more. This is what the Boundary Waters means to me.
This is written by Margaret Murray in Testimony, the Milkweed book. There may be people who feel no need for nature. They are fortunate, perhaps. But for those of us who feel otherwise, who feel something is missing, unless we can hike across land disturbed only by our footsteps or see creatures roaming freely as they always have done, we are sure that there should be wilderness. Species other than man have rights too. Having finished all the requisites of our proud materialistic civilization, our neon-lit society, does nature, which is the basis for our existence, have the right to live on? Do we have enough reverence for life to concede to wilderness this right?
Those are wonderful essays. And by writing them, you give the answer in the affirmative to the question that Margaret Murray, who is now 91, by the way, raises. The answer is we must find a way for wilderness and wildness to live on. So thank you again for coming and being part of this, I think, marvelous evening. Good night.
Well, I think like millions of Americans, I became initially introduced and fascinated by the Mississippi River through the books of Mark Twain, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Then having seen it with my parents on a trip one time when it was in full flood. Rivers to me seem like living beings. They have character, they have a personality, they're powerful. They were always coming from somewhere, going by me, and then going somewhere else, so it was full of mystery. Unlike oceans that just sort of sit there. Rivers had a real purpose in life, it seemed to me, and I wanted to sort of serendipitously follow down the river from one end to the other and see the kind of interesting people that I'd meet along the way. Rivers go places and do things, none more so than the Mississippi. Well, Mississippi Currents begins at the beginning, the headwaters in Lake Itasca, in Itasca State Park, where it's merely a brook, maybe 10 or 12 inches deep, with melon-sized rocks, and wandering off to the west and in the north as if it's looking for its way down to the Gulf of Mexico eventually, 2,400 miles later, and down 1,475 feet. The rivers actually in the Midwest used to flow north, but when the glaciers came through several ice ages, they scoured out the land, moved dirt from Canada down, and caused the rivers eventually to flow to the south that made the Midwest so bountiful and so open to transportation these days. And always there's the water, the endless brown water that predictably comes, never stops, and usually goes with a soothing, seasonal rhythm that calms people as long as it continues, making men and women go slower too and ponder unusual things like what's around the next bend in their lives. Well, the book is full of, I think, beautiful scenery and some of Roger Strauss's very evocative photographs, and it's also full of people and their own personal stories. There's Jack Katzenmeyer, the ranger in Itasca State Park, who spent his whole life there. It's almost like his own personal preserve and cares very much for the animals, the wildlife, and the people who come to visit. And there's Jim Hall, who runs Anderson House in Wabasha, the hotel where you can reserve not only a room, but a cat to come cuddle with you at night, have caramel rolls the size of your plate. It's just full of interesting people. Lonesome Jim, the librarian down near St. Louis, who provides books to readers on barges. So there's a fascinating cast of characters up and down the river. It's timeless, you know. It was here long before we were here, and it'll be here long after we're gone, like the mountains. Only the river moves. There's a life and a peacefulness in that. I always kid my partner Roger Strauss about his role in the book. He's a fantastic photographer. We've got about 6 dozen of his photographs here, and I think the text and the pictures sort of complement each other. He's got a beautiful picture of sunrise over Lake Itasca and a haunting foggy photo from Red Wing. And then, of course, there's Anderson House with Jim Hall and some of the cats that he rents out to customers in his hotel. And one of my favorites involves the mouth of the Mississippi River, this huge volume of water pouring out into the Gulf of Mexico, collecting debris from all across the country, 34 states, 15 million gallons every second going into the Gulf of Mexico. Well, you know, human civilization has been drawn to rivers as a magnet over many millennia for water, for food, for transportation, and necessarily when it involves humans, there's politics involved. There's a great sort of hubris, I believe, in humans and Congress thinking that they can actually control a natural beast as immense as the Mississippi River, but for some reason we have spent billions of dollars to pretend that we can, in effect confining the same volume of water in a much smaller space behind the dikes and levees, which, when it rains a lot, we're going to get floods. They're tragic floods. They cause billions of dollars in damage, and they also reveal some of the politics of the water situations. The river water inevitably flows downhill, and the river politics inevitably flow to the money, and both will change the face of the countryside forever and touch the lives of millions along the way. Well, it was really a wonderful privilege and actually an honor to get to travel the length of the river and then get to write about it. I've always been fascinated by writing, communicating messages to people that won't see me but will learn about a particular place or people through my selection and arrangement of words. The river is such a haunting presence in our personality here in the heartland. It's played such a major role in our lives. I thought there was an element of mystery about it, and I just wanted to capture it, take the readers with me on a journey from the source of the Mississippi all the way down to the end, and appropriately enough, we titled it Mississippi Currents. Water has always been the magnet for life in this world, be it wild, plant, or human life. Where water flows, life goes.
Northern Lights is presented to encourage your appreciation and support of Minnesota books and writers. Thank you for joining us. Please tune in again.